Now, the popularity of the do not call register on our phones would signify how many of us dislike being disturbed at home by telemarketers or sellers of any kind. Probably the only thing that closely compares to that is the knock on the door from salespeople trying to sell you things. But the fact is that people do it, they continue to do it, and the evidence shows in the last few weeks that despite the laws and rules associated with this kind of selling or telemarketing, they are continuing to do it against the laws. But the 50 Up Club has certainly warned that we can do something about it and we can arm ourselves with knowledge to make sure that we are not falling victim to these things. Christopher Zinn is a contributor with the 50 Up Club and joins us now. Christopher, thanks for your time.
Yes, hello, Sonya.
I do believe that this would be amongst some of the most hated behaviours that we could universally agree on.
It is, and look, the Australian consumer law is really pinned down on what door knockers can do in terms of the hours and what they have to, how they identify themselves, and particularly in terms of cooling off periods, we're giving you a chance to decide again. But I think that they really count on the fact that many consumers, particularly older ones who are more likely to be targeted by these people because they're more likely to be at home, they will just come and knock anyway. So I think the more we can make ourselves aware of what our rights are, and at the very simplest, that is, thank you very much, but no thanks, and they have to actually leave when you say that, that will actually arm us against some of the worst behaviours, which, as you said, have been subject to some very heavy fines in the past couple of weeks.
Let's take a look at these court cases because it goes to show that there are sellers out there who are defying the laws that are in place to protect us, and time again.
Yes, and they've particularly been, in terms of these big fines, Origin Energy, Energy Australia, Australian Power and Gas. I mean, they've all had fines of more than $1 million, $2 million this month in terms of Origin Energy. And that's for a number of misleading sales tricks and systems, and particularly about harassing people in the house. So, as I've said, if someone comes knocking at your door, they've got to do that within certain reasonable hours, not on Sundays. But if you ask them to leave, then they have to go. But the heavy sell is quite unlawful, although that, of course, can be a bit harder to define.
So to clarify, so they can't come on a Sunday. They have to come within reasonable hours. And what's that defined as, Christopher?
That's nine to five in terms of that, or 9 to 6 on Saturday. So again, what would be reasonable hours? But the issue too is that one, they have to show clear identification of who they are, and also obey any instructions you might go to leave. And that actually includes if you have a sticker on your door, on your front door, which says "Do not knock." That actually has some legal clout. And if they go past that, if the whole thing ends up with some sort of complaint, that can really count against them. So it's well worth getting one of those little stickers. They can actually give a lot more power to you in terms of, feeling confident to deal with some of these people. And look, funny enough, last week I was at my mother-in-law in northern New South Wales, and a door knocker came around. I couldn't believe it. And this was, a personable young woman trying to flog solar panels, and she kind of didn't produce ID. She kind of sounded like she was from the power company or from the government because she asked to see a power bill. And this is their modus operandi. They look at your power bill and say, oh, look, if you had one of our solar powers, it would cost, $70 less. Very complicated kind of thing to compare and work out, and certainly something you shouldn't be doing on your front door.
So we can put the stickers up. They have to comply with your requests to leave. But many of us think those sorts of laws, while in place, don't have much clout. These fines would suggest that they are actually policed and do have clout.
They do. As I say, the Australian consumer law, we've had it for 5 years or so. It really is prescriptive around the callers. As I've said, it's that they've got to leave plain English sales agreements, and those are documents. And again, I've had electricity door knockers who refuse to leave any paperwork. They just want to leave with your signature and then send you something and hope that the 10-day cooling off period, which initially applies to that sort of thing, will pass before you have a chance to cancel it, so they get their commission. As I've said, if you ask a seller to leave, they must go at once and not return for 30 days, which is a great thing to know. And the cooling off period, as I've said, is 10 days for contracts. And that means you can call off, even if you've signed, you can call it all off within 10 days and get a full refund. It can go up to 3 months if the seller has come outside those permitted times I discussed and didn't comply with the rules in terms of identification. So there's a lot of rules around callers, as there was, as you mentioned at the beginning, in terms of telemarketing and that do not call register, which has been very useful. But perhaps when certain areas like telemarketing get closed off, that widens up the area around door knocking, despite these very heavy fines that have typically been handed down to big energy companies who use third parties as a channel to distribute their services and ultimately don't have control of the behaviour of the people at street level.
I'm talking with Christopher Zinn, who is a contributor with the 50 Up Club, and we're talking about dodgy door knockers and how you can perhaps deal with them if you are not interested in dealing with them on your doorstep. On that issue, you've mentioned the rights you have in various ways, but just on a common sense approach, Christopher, how difficult is it dealing with contracts of this ilk when you've got nothing to compare it with?
Well, I use the word impossible very rarely because many unlikely things happen in our lives, but I would suggest it's quite impossible unless you happen to have the requisite training to compare energy contracts, solar panel contracts, almost anything like that with your slippers on in the front door. You've really, got to compare them side by side. You might want to use some of the government comparison websites, which I'd be interested in, which have the best coverage, to try and make a decision. And even using those over time, it's not as straightforward as we'd like it to be. But essentially, this is one person pushing one product, which they claim is the best, and using subtle techniques. I mean, one of these is what's called affinity marketing. So in areas of, say, people who might be a lot of Greek migrants there, they will bring someone in, a younger person who might speak Greek or come from a Greek background and talk about everything else apart from this to win older people's trust in particular, and then close the deal. So, you need to be very wary of the way that these kind of guys operate.
Christopher, if people have had these sorts of approaches or do in the future, where do they go to complain about this and get some action?
I would suggest Fair Trading in South Australia. They're very active, would be a great place to start. The ACCC, the Federal Consumer and Competition Commission, they're very interested in this, and they're the ones who've handed out these, started the court actions that have resulted in these very heavy fines. So those are the kind of places I would start. But look, a very simple way to make the people go away is just ask for their identification. I'd say just ask them to go away or ask for their identification or look at your watch and make sure that they're in the permitted times. And so I would say as soon as you show them that you know your rights, the dodgy ones will buzz off. Those that might be more legitimate perhaps will be less pushy or more mindful of your rights and their responsibilities under the consumer law.
And you mentioned a Do Not Knock sticker. I believe you can get that at www.dodoknock.org.au.
Yes, you can. And in fact, some fair trading, I'm not sure about South Australia, some fair trading departments do have them in stock in their branch offices and whatever. So, look, we might see the whole of Australia plastered with Do Not Knock stickers. Door knockers for electricity, and some of the big companies have now stopped using them. Perhaps this might become just a tradition that we tell our grandkids around, and they find it very hard to believe. I mean, there was a time when people door knocked selling life insurance. You can't actually sell financial services door to door anymore, which is a great thing. And that's another thing people should be aware of. Anyone coming around selling insurance or anything to do with finance or credit cards or debt, under no circumstances engage with them, because that is a definite breach of the law.
Christopher Zinn, thank you for your time today.
No, my pleasure. Thank you, Sonya.
Christopher Zinn, a contributor with the 50 Up Club. Let me give you that website address again. It's www.dodoknock.org.au, or ring our Office of Consumer and Business Affairs to report this sort of behaviour. But as Christopher says, the first line of defence is to know your own rights.
Join Tony Delroy tonight on Nightlife.
I think we all